I'm Paul Burstein. I'm a member of the Jewish Studies program here and a professor in the Department of Sociology. I'd like to welcome everybody to the third of this year's series of the Stroum Lectures. Those of you who've been around for a while may remember that 10 years ago, Sam Heilman spoke here about a general take on the American Jewish community. And he was pretty pessimistic about the direction that things were going in. 3 years ago, Calvin Goldscheider was here speaking at this occasion, and he had a much more optimistic take on things. I think people had a little bit of a hard time with that, but he had a much more optimistic take on things. And I think that one of the key things that distinguishes the more optimistic from the more pessimistic view of the condition of the Jewish community in the United States today and what its future is likely to be has to do with people's confidence in the ability of Jews in this country to innovate, to figure out ways to make changes in the Jewish community that will enable it to adapt to changing circumstances and to grow and flourish without giving up anything that's essential to its essence. Now, innovation can take a great many forms. One form that innovation has taken around here is this lecture series. Since the mid-1970s, when it was initiated and it's been maintained through the generosity of Samuel and Althea Stroum, and I'm very glad to see Althea here tonight, it has enabled thousands and thousands of us in the Seattle Jewish community to hear the best in Jewish scholarship being brought to us from around the country and around the world. 14 books have been published out of this series of lectures so far, which permits what is said here to go out and reach many, many thousands more people, and there are more books on the way. We anticipate that this year's lectures will become a book as well. And there are other kinds of innovation that are very important, and a second kind is the kind that this year's Stroum lecturer, Professor Chava Weissler of Lehigh University, is going to be speaking about, and that is innovation in religion, innovation as people try to make changes in their approach to Judaism and to Jewish spirituality in particular in a way that will make Judaism more meaningful to them, more meaningful to others in the United States today and in the future. This year's topic, as you know, is Spirituality in America, the Jewish Renewal Movement, and we've heard from Professor Weissler a week ago today and last Wednesday. Her first two talks, the first one was on Jewish renewal in the American spiritual marketplace, and we were introduced to what Jewish renewal is, what it stands for. Last Wednesday, we heard about gender and Jewish renewal with a particular emphasis on the role of women in the creation of Jewish renewal and in giving meaning to Jewish renewal. And today is the third lecture in this series. Tonight's topic is the four worlds and the popularization of Kabbalah, and I give you Professor Weissler.
Well, it's been a tremendous pleasure to be here over the past little over a week. I've been so appreciative of the warm hospitality extended to me by the Jewish Studies program here at the University of Washington and by the Stroums in founding this lectureship, and to see Mrs. Stroum here the whole time has really been very lovely. And I've also been grateful to the hospitality extended to me by the local Jewish Renewal community, so it's been a pleasure to get to know some of them as well. Now, so you all do well on the final exam. I'll just do a little review here. In my first lecture, I outlined the 7 major characteristics of the Jewish Renewal Movement, and they are the centrality of the quest for an experiential relationship with the divine, the use of Jewish tradition as a flexible resource with emphasis on Kabbalah and Hasidism, the openness to other religious traditions, the importance of charismatic leadership, the participation in American therapeutic culture, the commitment to tikkun olam, or social justice, and, as I talked about last time, renewal's explicit feminism and predominantly female membership. In my second lecture, I explored several of the gender issues connected with renewal, including the gender imbalance in membership, the conflict between essentialist and constructivist feminism, extra credit if you can tell me what those are, and most important for our subject tonight, the use and transformation of the Kabbalistic myth of the exile of the Shekinah, the feminine divine, by renewal Jews. As you may recall, I argued that for the Kabbalists, this myth is primarily about the fate of the people of Israel. For the Hasidim, it is about the life of the soul. Some renewal Jews have adapted this myth as a way to frame gender issues. The exile or eclipse of the Shekinah refers to the absence of women's voices and feminine spirituality from Judaism. Further, although in classical Kabbalah, the Shekinah is an ambivalent figure, sometimes becoming the agent even of the forces of evil, the Shekinah of Jewish renewal lacks the dark side found in Kabbalistic sources. So just to draw out the parallels here, that was one example of an adaptation of an aspect of Kabbalah or Jewish mystical teaching, and we can see the ways in which it has changed as being adapted by renewal. And tonight I'm going to look at another motif that's adapted. My primary interest in tonight's lecture is to explore the second characteristic of renewal that I just listed, the use of Jewish tradition as a flexible resource with an emphasis on Kabbalah and Hasidism. Specifically, I'll look at how Jewish renewal uses, adapts, and transforms material from the Kabbalah. In order to orient us to how Jewish renewal sees its relationship to the history of Kabbalah and other developments, I'd like to ask you to look at your first handout, Thumbnail Origins of the Jewish Renewal Movement, and I've got a kind of schematized version of it here. This is found in the Shabbat Siddur compiled by Rabbi Marsha Prager of Pnei Or, Philadelphia. And she compiled it together with, as I've just learned from Araya Soul, together with the late Rabbi David Wolf Blank for here in Seattle. And one of the major sources is Gershom Scholem's Major Trends in Jewish Mysticism. In any case, it was not compiled by me. I want to give credit where credit is due. While this chart is fascinating in the way it traces the ancestry of Jewish renewal to diverse influences from the Emancipation and the Enlightenment to Jewish feminism, the self-actualization movement, the Chavurah movement, ecological movement, latest science, and Eastern influences. For tonight, I'd like us to look primarily at the mystical heritage of renewal. See, go back up to the top here. In fact, it begins a little earlier than this chart with Spanish Kabbalah in the 12th, 13th, and 14th centuries. The Zohar, the great classic of medieval Jewish mysticism, was composed in Spain around the turn of the 14th century. The idea of the four worlds, which is what I'm going to be talking about tonight, developed in the years immediately following the composition of the Zohar. But you can see on this chart how the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1492 set the stage for further developments of mystical thought. First of all, in the 16th century school of Safed, in which Isaac Luria was one of the main figures. Sabbatianism, the failed Messiah Shabtai Tzvi, whose theology was based in mysticism. Hasidism, which actually began in the 18th century and flourished in the 19th century in Eastern Europe. So that all of those are part of the chain that renewal claims as its heritage. The chart itself as an artifact is quite interesting, and it shows renewals, let's go back down again, eclectic approach to sources. I said flexible use of sources, looking at Jewish tradition as a flexible resource. It's also interesting to notice what's missing from this chart. And that is mainstream rabbinic Judaism, Talmud, and Halakha. Now, those are not irrelevant to Jewish renewal, and they certainly informed Hasidism and Lurianic Kabbalah, but it's interesting that the focus is on the mystical movements. My focus tonight will be on the transformations of a particular Kabbalistic idea, the four worlds, and what those transformations can tell us about renewal spirituality. And I'll explain the four worlds a little later in greater detail. First, I want to set the stage. Now, do you remember the distinction I made in my previous lectures between transcendence and imminence as religious ideas? Does this ring any bells? The transcendent God is the God. This is all the monotheistic religions sort of have tension between transcendence and imminence. The transcendent God is the creator God, the God who is far beyond us, above us, powerful, from whom we are separated as humble creatures. The immanent God is the God who is a presence right here in the universe, whose presence fills creation in Jewish parlance. There's no place empty of God, according to the Hasidim, le tatar panui mineh. And therefore, in all of the Western monotheistic traditions, you have both the idea of the transcendent God and the God who is right here with us, God's presence in the room. Okay, so keep those ideas in mind. Okay, so what I'm planning to do tonight is I hope to show that a Kabbalistic teaching about the structure of the cosmos and the distance of a transcendent Godhead from the material world is transformed by renewal into a teaching about the nature of the self and how the material world and the self embody an immanent divinity. In order to make that argument, I'll begin with ethnographic evidence, a description of the worship service, the davening at Eilat Chaim, the Jewish Renewal Retreat Center in the Catskills. Next, I'll introduce the crucial renewal concept of paradigm shift, which I'm saving the best for last, haven't talked about up till now, and show how it is related to the developments that I talked about in my first lecture in the sociology of American religion. Then I'll give some background on the history of the concept of the four worlds in Kabbalah and Hasidism and what certain renewal teachers have done with it. And finally, armed with all that background, we're going to go back to the ethnographic evidence and its interpretation. So you got that ethnography, the vignette, the paradigm shift, American sociology of religion, or sociology of American religion, the four worlds and its development, and back to the service. Okay? All right. So let's begin with a picture. And I gave this picture very briefly at the end of my last lecture, but I'm going to do it in greater detail here. This is something of a composite, and I have to say the photographs are from a weekday service while I'm describing a Sabbath service so that they will look a little different. Okay, it's an early fall Sabbath morning at Eilat Chaim, the Jewish Renewal Retreat Center in the Catskills. At about 10 in the morning, people who have come for a weekend retreat begin to file into the yurt, a circular tent-like structure with a polished wooden platform floor for services, or for davening, as they call it, using the Yiddish term. Some of them have already spent an hour doing yoga or meditation, and some have been engaged in the study of the weekly Torah portion. As they enter, people remove their shoes, leave them outside the door or on shoe racks just inside. The room is laid out in a circle. In the center are meditation cushions and back jacks. Do you know what back jacks are? This woman is sitting on one. That is, it's got a back. It's like a meditation cushion. This is a meditation cushion. It's like a meditation cushion for people who need a back. So it's got a back on it. Back jacks. So they're sitting on back jacks, and then outside you can see the ring of metal chairs. At the eastern end of the yurt, which you can't really see here, there's a break in the circle where there's a portable Aron Kodesh, an ark containing the Torah scroll, a table on which the Torah will be read later in the service, and as it was recently pointed out to me here at Yetzirah, one of the rituals is moving the table into the center of the circle when it's time to read the Torah, and a chair set apart for the woman leading the davening. As they file in, the participants pick up a pack of photocopied sheets that will serve as a prayer book. Photocopied sheets, right? The majority of the daveners are in their 40s and 50s, more women than men, but some are as young as early 20s and others are in their 70s. Some, women and men, are wearing jeans and t-shirts. Others wear tailored slacks and shirts. A number of both sexes have donned flowing robes. You can't actually see this much because it's not Sabbath. Either white in honor of the Sabbath or in soft gauzy colors. Most of the daveners have their heads covered with embroidered kippot, with scarves, can't see that here, even a baseball cap or two, and most of them wear talitot. Some wear traditional prayer shawls. I don't know if we have any of those here. White with blue or black stripes. Others have added the ritual fringes to a length of African print cloth or a lace tablecloth, while others, finally, have donned the rainbow-striped pnei or talit, and you can see it again here, a sign of allegiance to the Jewish Renewal Movement, although by now many people wear it who are not members of the Jewish Renewal Movement. As the daveners settle into the circle, back to the circle, on cushions or chairs, the leader, a woman in her 50s in flowing purple robes, wearing Birkenstocks, begins to chant in Hebrew. Ma gadlu ma'asecha ya me'od amku machshevotecha. How marvelous are your works, O God. How very subtle are your designs. That's from Psalm 92. Others pick up the chant, and soon everyone is swaying in their seats to the music, eyes closed. After the chanting dies down, the leader speaks. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. We're gathered here on Shabbat Bereshit, the Sabbath, when we begin the cycle of reading the Torah once again with Genesis, with the story of creation. As we begin with Birchot HaShachar, the morning blessings, we can focus on a sense of new beginnings, new creation in our own lives and spiritual paths. I invite each of you to bless those beginnings. She stands and raises her arms, and so do the others. Brucha atya Shekinah Elohateinu Ruach HaOlam, she chants. Blessed are you, O feminine divine presence, our God, spirit of the world, bending at the first word in homage, reaching up to the presence of God, and reaching in all directions to acknowledge that the divine is imminent, is all around us in all directions. Everyone participates in the chant and the movements. Spontaneously, someone chimes in to conclude the blessing. For giving us this beautiful morning. Everyone chants, Amen. The blessing is repeated, and someone else contributes for a chance to renew and recreate ourselves, and so it goes for 15 or 20 repetitions, each one concluded by a different member of the congregation, thanking God for a chance to be at Eilat Chaim, for a butterfly noticed on a morning walk, for the new beginning that comes from crisp fall weather. As the service continues into the next section, Psukei de Zimra, the verses of song, the singing becomes more animated. Certain psalm verses, set to music by Shefa Gold, who composed the previous one, and others, are chanted with improvised harmony. Worshippers take maracas or tambourines or rattles from a basket of percussion instruments on the floor and keep time with the music. Some rise and dance spontaneously, while others meditate with their eyes closed. Finally, as the service approaches the Baruch Hu, the call to prayer, the congregation sings in unison. As we bless the source of life, so we are blessed, and the blessings give us strength and make our visions clear, and our blessings give us peace and the courage to dare. And it's repeated, and I can tell my voice, which is never very good, is already beginning to give out. So I will say that with the Baruch Hu, I'll try to sing it. Baruch Hu, dear one, Shekinah, holy name. When I call on the light of my soul, I come home. As they sing this last line, the worshipers reach out as if embracing and bring their arms close to their hearts. These are one variation of the prayers. The different interpretations are used in different services. As the service continues into Shacharit, it becomes much more similar to the traditional liturgy, although worshipers are invited to go outside and meditate during the Amidah, if they prefer that to reciting the traditional prayers. And the Torah service would require a separate discussion, and renewal services do not include Musaf, the additional service that's included in the traditional liturgy after the Torah reading. Although we'll analyze this service in greater detail later, let me just draw a few features to your attention. Most important is the powerful physical involvement that comes with singing, dancing, and chanting. Note also the way in which, at the beginning especially, worshipers are asked to contribute to the service by voicing their own blessings. This, along with the use of gender-neutral and feminine God language, the source of life, Shekinah, the physical setup of the worshipers in a circle, the sensuous flowing clothes, all recall aspects of feminist ritual that we discussed in the previous lecture. Okay, stage one, ethnography is done. We're now shifting to the paradigm shift. In order to understand more of what is happening in this service and renewal's transformation of the four worlds, we need to explore Zalman Schachter Shalomi's concept of the paradigm shift. Schachter Shalomi, who, as you may recall from my first lecture, was the founding figure of Jewish Renewal, has written about how he understands the origins of Jewish renewal within the broad sweep of Jewish history. Using the concept of paradigm shift, a fundamental shift in the way of thinking developed by the historian of science Thomas Kuhn, Schachter Shalomi has applied it to Judaism, specifically to the triad of terms Olam, Shana, and Nefesh, which originates in the Sefer Yetzirah, an approximately 9th century mystical work, pre-Kabbalistic mystical work. Literally, these words mean, Olam means cosmos or world, Shana means year, and Nefesh means soul or person, but they're used in Jewish philosophy and mysticism to mean space, time, and person or spirit. In his book, appropriately entitled Paradigm Shift, published in 1993, Schachter Shalomi points out that the Jewish people underwent a first incredible paradigm shift with the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem in the year 70 by the Romans. Before that time, he argues, Jewish worship was centered on sacred space, the Holy Temple, the site of sacrifice, the dwelling place of God's presence. Once the temple was destroyed, Judaism made the shift from sacrifices to words of prayer and study, and from a sacred place to a sacred structure of time, both the Sabbath weekday festival alternation and the understanding of history as moving towards a point of messianic redemption. Actually, he has a wonderful expression of this shift. He says, when we thought God liked lamb chops, we sacrificed lambs. Then we began to talk instead. And you may, I don't know if any of you are familiar with Abraham Joshua Heschel's wonderful work about the Sabbath, A Palace and Time, but he's referring to this same shift. According to rabbinic legend, not history but legend, this shift was brought about by a small group of sages headed by Yochanan ben Zakkai, who fled the Roman siege of Jerusalem and founded an academy in the small town of Yavne in Roman Palestine. Now, Schachter Shalomi argues, I'm quoting him, after the Holocaust, Hiroshima, and the establishment of the State of Israel, he says, we need a new Yavne. Further, he writes, for those of us whose minds were blown in the 60s, who had to learn to ground their new visions in the emerging technologies and consciousness, it has become clear that the move is from sacred space and time, Olam and Shana, to the sacredness inherent in persons. Olam, which gave way to Shana, now gives way to Nefesh. The worship and service of God, once mainly bounded by action and speech, is now evolving towards consciousness and thought. Okay, so this paradigm shift differs from the previous one, as Schachter Shalomi states, because now Jews realize that this shift affects the whole planet. Subsumed in this shift is the trend towards spiritual eclecticism, in that phrase I quoted in my first lecture, taking spiritual vitamins from the liturgical and theological medicine chests of various other traditions, ecology, reverence for the earth, vegetarianism, transpersonal psychology, and feminism, a lot of what's on the bottom of that chart we looked at. Now, what's fascinating here is that contemporary sociologists of religion have pointed to a similar paradigm shift in American spirituality in general. And here I'm picking up some things I talked about in my first lecture. Robert Wuthnow and Wade Clark Roof, both of them sociologists of religion, one at Princeton and the other at University of California, Santa Barbara, have recently written about the profound shifts that have taken place in American religious life over the past 50 years. Wuthnow argues that there has been a shift from a spirituality of dwelling to a spirituality of seeking. That is, rather than continuing to dwell within the established sacred spaces, the beliefs, practices, and traditions of, say, the small-town church and community, within which the task was to grow into the roles in the faith that were already there, Americans today must, as he says, search for sacred moments that reinforce their conviction that the divine exists, and they may have to negotiate among complex and confusing meanings of spirituality. Thus, a spirituality of dwelling sanctifies and upholds a communal religious values, while a spirituality of seeking makes the individual quest for meaning sacred. The spirituality of dwelling, like the Olam, or space-oriented Judaism, or Shana, Judaism oriented to a liturgical calendar discussed by Schachter Shalomi, flourishes in settled times, says Wuthnow, while the spirituality of seeking, the spirituality of nefesh, the sacredness of the individual person, the individual soul, flourishes in unsettled times, eras of social change. Wade Clark Roof further elucidates the sacredness of the self in the new American spirituality. Among those baby boomers he has now been studying for well over a decade, the search for a deeper level of encounter with the sacred, as he puts it, or the experiential face of religion, another of his phrases, emerged as a crucial theme. Spirituality, as his interviewees understood it, encompassed a great deal. He says, a source of values and meaning beyond oneself, a way of understanding, inner awareness, and personal integration. In a very fundamental sense, what is at stake is a viable conception of the self. This sense of self is difficult to achieve, he argues, when our social processes fragment and commodify our experience. Interestingly, Roof also points to the importance of the body in the spiritual quests of his interviewees. One should accept one's own body. It is only as embodied beings that we feel, laugh, cry, suffer, or love. All of this, says Roof, is fundamental to a sense of self and, many would argue, of the sacred. And we'll see these themes in Renewal as well. Let me highlight this point. Both Schachter Shalomi and the sociologists of religion, using different terminology, point to the emergence of the self as crucial to the meaning of spirituality in our day. This is important in Renewal's transformation of the four worlds of Kabbalistic cosmology. Okay, we're getting to the four worlds at last. All of this may seem like a long way around the barn, but we are getting to Kabbalah. Among the Kabbalistic concepts adapted by Renewal, the teaching of the four worlds is central to the thinking of Zalman Schachter Shalomi, as well as other leaders and teachers and ordinary members. Let me explain first what the four worlds mean in classical Kabbalah and in Hasidism, and then show how Jewish Renewal has transformed the teaching both conceptually and devotionally. The idea of the four worlds, as it emerged in 14th century Kabbalah, was essentially cosmological. That is, describing the structure of the cosmos. It described the structure of reality from the Godhead all the way to the material and demonic worlds. That is, the question the Kabbalists were trying to answer was this: how does one get from a transcendent, infinite, unknowable, absolute unity to this world of multiplicity, limit, evil, and pain? This distance seemed to them so great that it needed to encompass worlds upon worlds. From the infinite, the Ein Sof, there arose the world of Atzilut, emanation, the world of the Sfirot, or 10 attributes. This is the aspect of Kabbalistic teaching that I mentioned in my previous lecture. The infinite, unknowable, utterly transcendent Godhead enters into a process of limitation, or seeming limitation, in order to express itself in the 10 Sfirot, attributes such as wisdom and understanding, overflowing love and stern judgment. The 10th Sphira, known as Malchut, majesty, or Shekinah, imminence or indwelling presence, is, as we mentioned last time, often imagined as female, and she is the transition point between the realm of divinity and the lower worlds. When all is right, she receives the overflow of divine abundance from the Sphirot above her and transmits them to the lower worlds. When human sin and evil interfere, the channels are blocked, and she becomes inflamed, transmitting harsh punishments from the demonic world instead. But the lower worlds are no mere abstraction. They are carefully spelled out. After Atzilut, the realm of the Sfirot, comes the world of Bria, or creation. This is the world of the Merkavah, the divine chariot throne described by Ezekiel. You remember Ezekiel saw the wheel way up in the middle of the air, where he saw all kinds of things. Anyway, following Bria is Yetzirah, formation, which is the world of the angelic hosts, the angels, the seraphim, and other angelic beings. And finally comes Asiyah, making or doing, our own material world. Just as the Shekinah is regarded as an ambivalent figure in the current broken and unredeemed state of the cosmos, so too, the Kabbalists considered the world of Asiyah to be partially under the sway of demonic powers. Beginning with the Lurianic Kabbalah in the 16th century, however, and continuing even further in Hasidism in the 18th century, the four worlds became identified as well with states of meditation and stages of the liturgy, of the prayers, especially the weekday morning service. As the mystical adept strove to leave behind this corrupt material world, Asiyah, and ascend through the ever more pure and holy worlds of the angelic hosts, Yetzirah, of the divine chariot and the seven palaces of God, Bria, to draw near to the realm of the Godhead itself, Atzilut. That is, the focus of the direction of the ladder reversed, with an emphasis on the adept, the mystic, going up, rather than divinity unrolling and coming down. Another emphasis, especially of the Lurianic Kabbalists, was the tikkun, or repair, of the brokenness of the cosmos through meditative techniques and prayer. And for all of this, I just need to mention that there's a wonderful scholar named Pinchas Giller, who's at the University of Judaism, who's working on the four worlds in Lurianic Kabbalah. In Hasidism, the great religious revival of 18th century Eastern European Jews, the doctrine of the four worlds received further development and became identified as well with the inner aspects of the psyche. This is in line with the general reinterpretation of Kabbalah by Hasidism, in which cosmological and historical elements were psychologized, and the emphasis shifted from cosmic redemption to individual salvation. Hasidism also reached out to become a mass movement in which ecstatic religious experience, often reached through singing and dancing, and sometimes actually in the early days, through even the later days, through alcohol and tobacco, was at the core. Interestingly, as the scholar Moshe Idel remarks in his recent study of Hasidism, the reinterpretation of Kabbalah in psychological terms, as the Hasidim did, that is, in terms of individual spiritual experience, is always associated with movements that attempt to spread mystical teachings beyond the realm of the elite. And he has several other examples besides Hasidism. In any case, early Hasidism was not consistent in its interpretation of the four worlds. For example, the early 19th century master Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev saw the four worlds in ascending order as the worlds of action, speech, thought, and faith. Only in Lubavitch Hasidism do we meet the source for renewal's interpretations. Okay, so now let's take a look at the four worlds in Jewish renewal. The sources in Chabad, or Lubavitch, should not surprise us. Zalman Schachter Shalomi did spend many years as a Lubavitcher Chassid. The liturgical meditative aspect of the teaching was developed further by Schachter Shalomi, from whom it spread via his disciples to other Jewish renewal groups. Building on Chabad traditions in the Tanya, and probably also oral traditions or lesser-known works, Schachter Shalomi further psychologized the four worlds, interpreting them as references to aspects of human existence. Asiyah is the physical body, Yetzirah is the realm of feeling and emotion, Bria represents the intellect, and Atzilut is intuition or being or spiritual union. This recalls the shift of the sacred to the self as described by Wuthnow and Roof. So you have both this process that started in Hasidism and also a process that's going on in American religion today of shifting the emphasis of the sacred to focus on aspects of the self instead of aspects necessarily of the cosmos. Aleph, the Alliance for Jewish Renewal, has adopted this teaching as a comprehensive framework. Let me quote from the Statement of Principles on the Aleph website. We of Aleph, Alliance for Jewish Renewal, strive to open ourselves to awareness of the sacred in all existence. We strive to create Jewish paths of prayer and meditation, study, communal life practice, and public action that embody this outlook. We see ourselves in a crucial position at these times of paradigm shift and are committed to help develop a spirituality through which Judaism can transform itself to continued viability in the service of Tikkun Olam, the healing and balancing of this planet. Together, we affirm principles and values that flow together from the four worlds of, and here, these are the translations they use, the four worlds going from top to bottom of being, knowing, relating, and doing. The website goes on to list 18 affirmations of Alepht's principles divided among the various worlds. To give just one example, one that's germane to our discussion for this evening, listed under the world of Bria, knowing, is affirmation number 6. Among our guides to interpretation of Torah are the prophetic, Kabbalistic, and Hasidic traditions as they are now being transformed in the light of contemporary feminist spirituality, process theology, and our own direct experience of the divine. Perhaps the most striking adaptation Jewish Renewal makes of the four worlds is as a framework for prayer. Renewal stresses the correspondence already found in earlier sources between the four worlds, understood psychologically, and the four sections of the Sabbath morning liturgy. The Birchot HaShachar, the morning blessings, are considered an expression of the world of Asiyah, or physicality. Psukei de Zimra, verses of song, are related to Yetzirah, and that's emotion. The Shema, the central affirmation of faith and its surrounding prayers, is connected to Bria, intellect or knowing. And Amidah, the standing prayer, recited silently, represents the worshiper's arrival at Atzilut. A morning service that follows this schema is often referred to as a four worlds davening. It's important to note, by the way, that not every Jewish Renewal Sabbath morning service follows this framework, but it is a significant strand of renewal worship. For example, Rabbi David Zaslow's widely used Jewish Renewal prayer book, Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha, Worship the Lord with Gladness, begins each section of the service by keying it to its place in the ladder of worlds. Or there's a CD called The Dance of the Soul by a woman named Sigal Breyer. The liner notes say, you may wish to use this CD in a spiritual practice, a yoga class, or an integrated prayer and movement session. The tracks are in the order of the daily Jewish prayer via the Kabbalistic four worlds, and she explains which tracks are associated with which world. To clarify what all this means, please get out your next handout. So let's look at Davening Through the Worlds, a flowchart for the Sabbath morning service written by Marcia Prager, rabbi of Pnei Or in Philadelphia, and one of Shachar Shalomi's students. Prager includes this in the introduction to the Sabbath morning prayer book she compiled and edited for her congregation. As she told me in an interview, the point of this introduction was to let people know that there was more to the service than they had learned in Hebrew school, and she hoped to set them to explore these themes in greater depth. Okay, let's see here. So, the Jewish mystical tradition views the unfolding of creation as the emanation of the four worlds or levels of spiritual energy, and she names them. The Asiyah, the world of action, Yetzirah, the world of formation, Bria, the world of creation, the fourth world, Atzilut, the blazing emanation of pure divinity. The Kabbalah teaches that human beings as living vessels of consciousness are capable of experiencing these energies. We use our capacity for heightened awareness to travel in these worlds, connecting with our source in the divine. And she goes on to say that services refers to organized prayer, as you can see on your handout, and that the service takes us on a journey through the four worlds, from the most basic physical plane of Asiyah up through the peak of Atzilut, and then gently back down. Hasidic teaching calls this progression the ladder, referring to Yaakov, Jacob's famous night vision of a ladder set in the earth whose top is reached into the heavens. This, said our teachers, is the ladder of our prayers. The goal is not to rush overly swiftly to the top, but rather to savor the fullness of the journey. This is the pilgrimage of consciousness. Okay, and this is a more schematized version of the sheet you have in your hands. Let me just point out that on this sheet, as handed out, there is the four-letter name of God, and perhaps those of you who don't want to keep this should think about not casually tossing it, since you could give it back to me if you want. Since we traditionally treat the name of God with respect, and as you can see here, each of the letters of the four-letter name of God is associated with a different one of the worlds. So let me just give you some highlights from the flow chart here. We start in Asiyah, the morning blessings for body and soul. Come awake and alive as a distinct being. Begin the daily journey. Engage the body. Establish sacred space. Yetzirah. Psuke de Zimra, verses of Psalm song. She says, quicken the heart, connect with wonder and amazement, praise creation. Bria, the Shema, the central Jewish affirmation of faith and its blessings. Be protected, she says, be free of self-limiting deceptions, dissolve boundaries, connect with love, connect with holiness. Atzilut, the Amida, the silent standing prayer, talk to the universe. Oops, guess that cursor is drifting out of spiritual experience. Or Ein Sof, the endless light. Yes, it seems to be descending. This is followed by the instruction, reintegrate as an individual self, divine mind meets your mind, integrate most expanded consciousness. Then at the end of the service, re-entry, reintegrate, and reattune to normal reality. Hold on to expanded consciousness. Actually, Arthur Wasco, who's a renewal leader in Philadelphia, remarked to me that going back to the world of Asiyah is actually structured in by the announcements at the end of the service. So far, we've examined what Marcia Prager says about the movement of the Sabbath morning service. But what happens in the service? Let's listen to the late Rabbi David Wolf Blank of Seattle explaining to service leaders how to work with the four worlds. At some point, we ask the participant to, Yes, here it is. As davening leaders, we direct the attention of our congregation to begin with the first of the four worlds, and with the most obvious feelings in the body, often the aches and pains. Called the world of Asiyah, or action, this plane of experience is considered the most manifest, the most obvious of the worlds. At some point, we ask the participants to switch the quality of the sensings to a world of higher forms, the archetypal form of Yetzirah, the emotional urgings in the heart of the body. Symphonic davening is done not as a duty, but as a strategy to enable a community of friends to act as a whole. We come more together and gradually grow toward a peak or a few peaks of esprit, of elan, unity in spirit, and call out, hallelujah. This is all in the world of Yetzirah, the verses of songs. Next, perceive what's happening in the mind's electronic processes. The world of Bria, feel the great Echad, the one of the Shema, in the central nervous system. We go through three worlds and notice the body has not been left behind in world number one. The body is in each world, only sensed with different attentions. And so we come to stand in Amida, the great standing, the alignment of all the worlds together as we enter Atzilut, the world of just being, according to Eastern meditators, the egoless world, according to Kabbalists, the world of spiritual inspiration that brings it all together in a single metaphor. We stand in Atzilut and pay attention to the highest part of the body, the soul, the larger aura that we see about, that we each see about the other when we look with the third psychic eye. Now, recall the description towards the beginning of my paper. The service begins with chanting and movement. See, now we're into the analysis of the ethnography. The service begins with chanting and movement. As we now know, that part of the service, the beginning, the morning blessings, is the world of Asiyah, of physical and material existence. And indeed, chanting and movement continue through the first and second parts of the service in particular. Music is crucial to Jewish renewal worship. Chanting can help the worshipers to feel deep emotion and involvement, and in some cases, trance or altered states of consciousness. Movement, whether ritualized or spontaneous, can have similar effect. Recall that Prager defines, this was on the handout, I didn't actually say this. Recall that Prager defines davening as the unique Jewish prayer practice which combines modal chanting of sacred text, meditation, and movement. Thus, for some participants, Four Worlds has come to signify a style of worship as much as or more than a meditative ascent from the physical to the divine, while for others, the Four Worlds schema has become an intellectual tool for making sense of the liturgy. One woman I interviewed told me that the service had just seemed like a hodgepodge to her until she learned about how the sections were related to the Four Worlds. That is, for many renewal Jews who may not have previously been very familiar with the liturgy, the Four Worlds are the structure of the service rather than a more accurate picture might be a Kabbalistic and Hasidic interpretation of the service. But something even more striking emerges from careful observation and analysis of the Sabbath services in Jewish renewal settings. The way the worlds are revalued, both explicitly in the writings of Schachter Shalomi, Marcia Prager, David Wolfblank, and other leaders, or, I argue, implicitly in the performance of the davening. The physical world, seen in classical Kabbalah as under the power of demonic forces, is radically revalued as positive. Remember how David Wolfblank insisted that the body was not left behind in the journey through the worlds. The introductory section, Birchot HaShachar, the morning blessings keyed to the bodily aspect of our existence, is greatly expanded in Four World services. So is the second section, Psuke de Zimra, the realm of emotion. One renewal rabbi referred to the Psuke de Zimra section as the Jewish Renewal Hit Parade. The parts of the service having to do with intellect and intuition spiritual union are, relatively speaking, brief, and more important, often unelaborated and less changed from the traditional liturgy. The heart of a Four Worlds davening is the physical and the emotional. This parallels the positive revaluation of the body found in other American spiritual movements and the stress on emotion typical of pietism in general. And this includes the pietistic movement we call Hasidism. To quote Wade Clark Roof one more time, because feelings and passions are situated in the body, these are all engaged by means of the body in religious ritual. In healing rituals, bodies are transformed. In pilgrimage rituals, bodies experience movement through time and space. In trances, body posture is the means by which consciousness is altered. In all such cases, bodily involved rituals structure spiritual awareness and transform individual identity. To conclude, another of Alepht's 18 affirmations, this one said in the world of Yetzirah, relating, as it is transcribed on their website, is the following. We will reach out toward including all who seek but have not yet found a spiritual home in the Jewish community or a satisfying connection to the Jewish people and its teachings and traditions. Renewal particularly speaks to Jews who are searching for spirituality, for an experiential connection with the divine, and these are people who are not likely to find a comfortable place in many of the other varieties of American Judaism. An important part of Renewal Judaism is its delving into that part of Jewish tradition most directly concerned with reaching for the divine, the mystical tradition of Kabbalah and Hasidism. As we have seen this evening, making the mystical tradition broadly available transforms its meaning in ways that can be understood either as part of the transformations of American religion in our era and also as part of the history of Jewish mysticism. I recall Moshe Idel's remark that popularization of mysticism and psychologization go hand in hand. From a teaching about the utter transcendence of the infinite one, the Four Worlds have become an affirmation of embodiedness, of the sacredness of the self, and ultimately a celebration of the imminence of the divine in the physical world. Jewish renewal owes this transformation as much to the paradigm shift from olam to shana to nefesh, from a spirituality of dwelling to a spirituality of seeking, as it does to the Kabbalistic and Hasidic traditions on which it draws. Nonetheless, instead of drawing wholesale from someone else's medicine chest, Renewal tries to create a Jewish language in which to express and shape contemporary American spirituality. Thank you very much.
Questions?
Many of the questions that we heard at the previous lectures from the audience and that I heard in discussion at the reception after the first lecture were of the same form. There was a subset of them were the same form. They were more or less, can they really do that? You know, come on, is this really Jewish? Jewish yoga, moving around in the services, and the extremes of sort of the meditative quiet and the loud singing and dancing in the services and in other parts of Renewal, and really taking the Four Worlds Kabbalah stuff seriously and integrating it into all parts of our practice. And there were several questions that were directed sort of to the halakha of that. And you sort of artfully sidestepped a few of those questions after the first lecture, saying that you're not here to be an expert on halakha, you're not here to talk about the doctrine or the theology as has taught in the seminary, but rather the experience of ordinary members of Jewish Renewal, the facts on the ground in the field. So my question is more directed towards that.
Yeah.
In your research, in your data that you gathered from members of Jewish Renewal, in how they experience it on the ground, do you see Jewish Renewal members and the teachings that they've absorbed, do they see that they are making a break with halakha? Are they self-consciously saying, okay, we're making a break? Or do they rather see that they are plumbing different parts of halakha, different parts of Torah, different parts of strands of, as you talked about a lot tonight, Kabbalistic background, and integrating it in a new way that is as equally valid in terms of Jewish tradition, Jewish connection, Jewish halakha?
Well, Jewish Renewal members clearly feel the second way. That is, their experience is that they are finding a creative way to be Jewish. They want to be Jewish. I mean, they are people sometimes who have tried other spiritual traditions and are very excited to find a Jewish way to meditate, a Jewish way to connect with the infinite. Many of them actually take on more halachic practice or more traditional Jewish practice as they become involved in Jewish Renewal, so that they may start observing Shabbat in some fashion, they may start observing Kashrut in some fashion, they may start studying more Jewish texts of one sort or another. So that it's clearly for them a way to connect with Jewish tradition and a way to keep that tradition alive, a tradition that for many of them, with a kind of traditional, the kind of normal Hebrew school background or maybe no background, had seemed kind of dead. Usually Renewal Jews are extremely excited about what they find in Judaism. I mean, these questions are difficult historical ones. I mean, if you think about the controversy that surrounded the advent of Reform Judaism 200 years ago, whether it was the introduction of organ music or the introduction of praying in the vernacular language of English or German or whatever it was, mixed seating, all of these seemed extremely un-Jewish to traditional Jews at the time, and have become a normal part of a large branch of Judaism. So that we're still in the much earlier stages of Jewish renewal. So I guess we'll need to see how it all shakes out in history and which parts of renewal become sort of a normal accepted part, whether renewal becomes a normal accepted variety of Judaism, and whether things that come from renewal influence other branches of Judaism, which I think they do. I think you see classes on spirituality, classes on Kabbalah, explorations of meditation in a wide variety of Jewish settings now. I even read in the foreword a couple of months ago, how in Orthodox congregations people are now asking for more spirituality in one way or another. So I guess that's my answer.
Thank you.
Quick question.
Yes.
You talked a little bit before about some of the people who are coming into this Jewish Renewal Movement starting to keep kosher in some fashion, and then there was something else that they were doing in some fashion. And I was trying to figure out what that meant.
Sure.
Do they actually follow the practices that are laid out, or do they modify?
Let me put it this way. One of the most popular fashions for which Jewish renewals people keep kosher is to become vegetarians.
That's easier.
And no, but it's not that. They see that as, there are midrashim about how Adam and Eve were vegetarians in the Garden of Eden, and it was only after God only gives them permission to actually eat vegetables and fruits, and it was only after Noah that people got permission as a kind of concession to eat meat. So that the idea is that vegetarianism is actually the purer form of kashrut. I mean, Rav Kook had that view. So, but that goes in well with the ecological emphasis and interest of many renewal Jews. There's also, they have a concept called eco-kashrut, in which things may be kosher, but they're not kosher unless they are also good for the ecology. So kind of preference for organic foods and things like that. But the idea of sacred eating, and that there are rules about it, and trying to struggle with what those rules should be now is part of it.
Could I ask one last question? You, the movement sounds kind of anti-authoritarian in the way that a lot of things stemming from the 60s were, sort of rejection of leaders, and among feminists too, rejection of necessarily having a man running the show. What does the movement do as far as rabbinic training and having leaders in that sense?
Well, I did actually talk about this a little bit before, but let me just say that actually, although there's a strong egalitarian impulse in renewal, there's also, for many renewal Jews, an importance of charismatic leadership, and that there is a rabbinical instruction program.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you all again.